Welcome in to the off season, episode 1 to the Cyclone Fan Perspective. Shout out to Camden Parks, by the way, our producer on the Play the Fight Song podcast for that awesome intro. Kind of mixing it up for the off season, just kind of going back and rewatching a couple of those highlights really gets me excited to talk some Cyclone football. As usual, I'm joined by recurring co-host, recurring guest, my brother, JT. JT, how we doing? I know that we've got Cyclones in the Super Bowl. We have the first place Cyclones in the basketball. First place Cyclones
Not
in the Big
first
12.
place. Yeah. Well, did TCU beat them? TCU beat
TC
Texas Tech?
I hope so for a parlay that I had. They were up like 7 with a few
We
minutes to
needed
go.
Tech to lose to be in first place. So
That just tells you how much I've been keeping up on Cyclone basketball. I've been so behind with all of this stuff. But yeah, how we doing?
you're missing out. There's a lot of good Big 12 basketball being played right now, but like my banner says, there's a lot to be proud of as a Cyclone fan right now. We got Brock Purdy in the Super Bowl. We got Iowa State rattling off top 10 wins as they do in basketball. Schedule release, Tyrese Halliburton balling out. Just a lot of good stuff. Also, shout out Dave Montgomery playing in the NFC Championship. Can't forget about that.
Big Dave.
A lot going on.
What I think one of the cooler parts is like Halliburton wearing Purdy's jersey around. Like first of all, how many NBA All-Stars do you see like repping a dude who they went to school with? Like
Nah, it's pretty sweet.
I'm trying to think on the top of my head, like you don't see like Brandon Miller wearing a Alabama football jersey around or something like that. That just, I don't know. It's super nerdy,
Yeah.
but it's actually really cool.
No, it means a little more to a school like Iowa State. I mean, they're not really known for any of that. So it's that
Putting them
5-star
up.
culture all the way around, baby.
Well, that was going to be my question is what do you think? We'll start off with that, even though it's a little NFL related. Do you think that there's implications with if, say, the 49ers do win? What would that mean to Iowa State football? Do you think it would mean anything? Does it give us a little extra publicity?
I don't know if it really. I don't think it affects Iowa State at all. I mean,
You don't think it would impact them one way or the other?
it'll be another it'll be a cool like feather in our cap to like be able to say, but I mean the publicity and stuff that he's already gotten as the last pick and everything, and like I said, David playing, Brees coming on the scene. It's already kind of getting a lot more publicity, so I don't know if him actually winning helps recruiting, but I don't know. Doesn't hurt.
Let me change this question. If they win and he wins Super Bowl MVP, do you name something after him in the football complex at the stadium?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you give him I don't know I think a statue is a little extreme. But maybe like a plaque in the stadium, something. You got to do something.
I think even if he loses, that's going to happen. So, I mean, if he wins, it'll just it'll accelerate it. But
the fast in the process. I think they'll look at doing
it's
something.
Going to happen. It's already going to happen regardless.
Retire his jersey. I know Seneca. I'm a Seneca advocate, so I think they got to retire 50 either way.
Basketball has retired the same number more than once somehow, or they've hung the same jersey in the rafters more than once. So I don't know. Maybe football.
That would be a cool day. That would be a cool day. All right. If you're just joining us for the first time, welcome in. Appreciate you guys tuning in. This is the Cyclone Fan Perspective, where we are brought to you by the Play the Fight Song podcast, a podcast that covers all things college football every single Thursday. It is released on Apple and Spotify, and you can listen to our now live episodes every Tuesday night. We just started doing that. Ton of fun. I really, really enjoy that, doing that with the guys, and hopefully getting you guys more content as the offseason progresses. But this is all things Iowa State football centric. Obviously, we might dip into a little Brock Purdy and Cyclone basketball here and there, but even though the offseason's upon us, we are still stuck covering a lot because a lot is happening with the Cyclone football program as we head into February. Guys are getting on campus for the first time. Classes are starting up again. Justin, before you know it, we're going to have spring practice. We will give you, I don't know, I don't want to say all access look like we're media members, but we're going to the spring game. I don't know.
If they do a couple of spring practices, I can pop out to a spring practice.
There you go. Well, they got to do a spring game again. I really enjoyed that, and we need to get out there because there's a few guys that we're going to cover tonight in the transfer portal that we probably are going to get our eyes on for the first time when that day comes around. and we got to talk about it. That's really exciting. But first, let's start off with just kind of some news since we've last touched base kind of after the loss in the Liberty Bowl. Nothing crazy. Like we said, we want to cover Brock and what everything's going on with the Cyclone football program going into the Super Bowl next weekend. But on the coaching side of things, on the staff side of things, linebackers coach Tyson Veit has left the program and has taken the defensive coordinator's job at Cincinnati. To basically put it in perspective for those who aren't all things in the entire staff, from quarterbacks coach to receivers coach to linemen, whatever it may be. Tyson Veit's a huge loss, but it's not surprising. And actually, if you're pretty familiar with the program, it probably should have happened sooner. To leave him around, keep him around this long is it's been really a win for Matt Campbell and his staff. What I heard was it was on the Cover 3 podcast. They were even talking about it. That's how big of a deal it was. And Bud Elliott, who I think is one of the best college football analysts around, says this is a really good get for Cincinnati. Every linebacker in America apparently knows about Tyson Veit. He's apparently reached out to him at one point. So I don't think this will change a ton for Iowa State, but you might lose a really good coach on a position that I think really he maximized the potential of the linebackers this year. When you say, I thought it was the weakest position on our team, but I thought the most out of it. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely wasn't as strong this year as they've been, but they also didn't have the talent that we've had in the past. And I also think like that's a position that we obviously, if it was weak this year, we needed to improve next year. And losing him obviously doesn't help. And especially like losing him to an in-conference opponent, that also kind of sucks. I'd much rather see him if he's going to go to leave the conference, because it would suck to see him kind of turn around Cincinnati's defense.
I don't know what's their fascination for our entire staff. I don't know if you remember. Well, Manning never called any plays there, but they picked him up right away as soon as he was on the market, and then obviously left to go to the NFL. But apparently Cincinnati has a great admiration for Iowa State's coaching staff. So anytime we might get rid of them, they're going to go pick them up. Apparently that's how it works.
They got a good eye.
Moving into some of the other things that have been going on in the offseason, we got to cover it tonight. The transfer portal window is, I want to say, it's never closed, but it's officially closed for the normal transfer. Coaches can still leave and guys can still enter the portal, things like that. Other things on the recruiting side, Iowa State's basically wrapped up their entire transfer portal class, at least for the winter cycle. Who knows what they'll bring in the spring, if they'll go after anybody, if anybody might leave. And this weekend, Iowa State had a huge game against Kansas in basketball, where they hosted a good class of juniors. So got about, I think it was 5 or 6 guys on campus. And I know we're not talking basketball, but just, I don't know, I could pick worse games to bring a recruit on campus. If you're going to show a recruit how it rolls, I think, you couldn't have picked a better weekend, because that place was rocking. And it really shows not only on the basketball side of things, but that's really what Iowa State fan bases are about, was that Saturday showing.
For sure.
So that being said, I want to highlight one recruit that was on campus on Saturday. For those who are from the state of Iowa, for those who are familiar, there's a quarterback up north in Algona named Alec Mansky. He is a junior out of Algona. He will be a senior next year, I believe. I haven't researched it completely. He is a current 3-star, and he is a top 5 player in the state of Iowa. I've just talking with some friends and their opinions on this kid, and I know that they just brought in a Southeast Polk quarterback coming into this winter for Iowa State. I think they got to go all in on this kid. I'm really excited about him. Iowa State's had some decent success with in-state quarterbacks. Obviously, the last 2 recruiting classes, they've brought in one. This kid holds offers from A&M, Minnesota, Kansas State, Nebraska, and Pitt. If you're from out of state and you're tuning in, for a quarterback from Iowa this is a smaller class in the state of Iowa. They're 3A, so it's about 90 kids a class. This is a big deal. This kid's really talented. One thing I like about him, he's kind of a taller, lengthier kid. He's about 6'2", 6'3". He's not super tall like JJ Cole, but he's a pretty good height. He's got a good arm, and A&M recently offered him, and they've come into the picture, which really opened my eyes. I was like, okay, this kid's legit. Like if an SEC, this is I would say a higher end SEC school with a big wad of cash to deal with. If they're showing interest in this kid, this is a big deal. Iowa State, I kind of think saw that, and they posted on Twitter that the entire staff was at his basketball game. I believe it was last night. So that shows kind of the importance of what this kid means to that program and really where he's at on their recruiting radar. Also something to note, there's a defensive end from Algona and Jack Limbaugh. He also plays at Algona. So they're double dipping into recruits. So not a bad time to get up north there to go see him. That's just something to keep an eye on in the recruiting cycle as this year goes into place. Hopefully Iowa State could land him. I think he'd be awesome for the program in 2 or 3 years. But let's get to kind of the fun stuff. I'm more of a transfer portal guy, at least right now. I think it is kind of become it's not more important than recruiting, but it can really turn the tide for different programs. Some programs like Colorado, maybe Florida State, Louisville will bring in 20 guys, and that will be kind of their starters for next year. You get a program like Iowa State, they don't bring in a ton. They're not former 5-stars. They're not all conference guys, but Matt Campbell is he's really purposeful on who he wants to bring in. And every single guy on the list below that you're seeing right now will find a spot on this team next year. I guarantee you. And Justin, I'm going to go through them quickly, and then we'll kind of talk about them, maybe who you think will add the most important piece for Iowa State next year. Let's talk about the Army wide receiver and Isaiah Alston. This is an interesting one. He's a 6'4", 195-pound kid. He had a nice sophomore and freshman year where he had 16 and 22 catches. Only had 9 catches last year. I don't know. You just never know what you're going to get with a service academy, and especially when you're a receiver at the service academy. Kind of an odd situation. If you don't pay attention to Army football, they're not throwing 40 times a game ever. They're barely throwing 50 times per season. So he's got some big play exposure to himself. I think he can add that spot to maybe a 2 or 3 spot at the receiver position for Iowa State. But I wasn't a huge fan of it at first, but it has really grown on to me, and I've seen some tape. I think I'm going to really like him. Dylan Barrett, guard out of Wisconsin. This is going to be a theme. We're going to talk about it later. This was a guy who didn't play a ton at Wisconsin. He was a former 3-star. I believe he's from the state of Wisconsin. He's a big kid, though. He's 6'4". I think he's like 375. Anytime we bring in a Power 5 offensive lineman, you're not going to hear one complaint from my mouth. I don't care if he's got 10 snaps under his belt or 1,500. Jalen Travis, the Princeton tackle. If you guys saw this last week, this really blew up Twitter, and Iowa State fans should be really excited about it. From everything that I've seen, this was the number 1 guy on their transfer portal list. This was the guy they're like, we are going to get this guy. He's 6'9". He is just tall as hell. If you know his brother, he plays for, I think, the G League right now. He was a star at Kentucky, Reed Travis. So he's got athletic in his genes. This guy's going to be a stud. He was one of the top FCS transfers coming out of the portal. This was easily the best get for Iowa State. Kennard Snyder, we talked about him, the ULM defensive end. He was an all-conference honorable mention Sunbelt guy. I think he's going to play right away. Jalen Jackson is a 5'6" running back out of Eastern Michigan. He had 136 carries for 572 yards last year. He's supposed to be more of a receiver back. I'm not really sure. If he's 5'6", I don't know where he puts into that, but I mean, that's why I'm not calling plays. He's got a lot of reps. He's got a lot of experience, and I think they're just trying to get a veteran in that running back room right now with how young it's going to be. Last guy, kicker from Florida Atlantic. He's a walk-on, and Carter Davis. Again, they go to the portal for a kicker, just like they did with Chase Contreras last year. Chase Contreras had like 3 kicks in his career at Nebraska, and I mean, I think Contreras was could arguably have been the best kicker in Matt Campbell's era. Yeah, Andrew Mevis was really good, but Contreras was accurate every single time as long as the snap went in. So out of those 6, Justin, I could make a case they're all going to play next year and maybe even start. Which one catches your eye, or what are you most excited about from this portal class?
The fact that we got two guys on the O line, both at a guard and at tackle with Dylan Barrett and Jalen Travis, I think that's going to be probably the most impactful guys that we brought in. I mean, yeah, it's good to see us go out and get some needs like kicker and get some more depth at running back and even getting more depth at receiver. I know obviously we're going to lean heavily on the three guys we're bringing back next year with Higgins, Knoll, and Bramer, but just get more depth to that position. That's good. But I mean, just solidifying that O line. That's all we talked about last year. A lot of the games that we struggled, I mean, that was the main concern is our O line. So addressing that was definitely huge.
I look at replacing a couple of things. Looking at Alston, you look at a guy like Dimitri Stanley, who came in, who got a ton of snaps and a lot of reps the year prior when we went 4-8. Not as much this year. He played a lot. I think this is a guy that is an upgrade from Stanley. I thought Stanley was a nice player, but Alston's taller. He's got more of a playmaking ability. Look at his highlights if you get a chance. Like they have this one-handed catch
yeah.
that's all over Twitter.
That was the first thing I thought of. Same thing as you. Is like, oh, we got a receiver from Army. Like, I didn't even know they threw the ball this year. So I was like, damn.
What's this guy gonna do? Well, now you look at it. We talked about Bramer, but now you have Higgins and Alston on the outside, two of the guys who are basically the exact same height and look like they have the same amount of ability. And then you have Jalen Knoll in the slot. This is a pretty good receiving core. Like if you had asked me last year, I did not imagine Iowa State's receiving core being in the top half of the new Big 12. And I think it is. Now we don't have a McMillan out of Arizona. We don't have a Travis Hunter or a Will Shepherd out of Colorado, just to name a few guys. But this is a core that's going to be really, really good. And then you throw an all freshman tight end on top of it. So I'm really excited for the passing game next year. That hasn't been something of worry coming out of last year, but I think we're just adding it to our arsenal. Any thoughts on Jalen Jackson, the running back out of Eastern Michigan? I don't know. I haven't seen a ton of this. He wasn't rated on any 24/7 stuff. What's a guy from the MAC coming in with 136 carries going to do with a group that's got Abu Sama and Harris and I'm already forgetting Carson out of the second string. So where does he fit into place? Does he, or is it just adding another guy to maybe take a couple carries?
I don't know. We've seen that Campbell likes to get like kind of a platoon system going these past couple of years since Brees has been gone. So maybe it's just increasing depth there. And we also saw, I mean, Sama had the good game against K-State, but then he didn't play so well at the end. So maybe they're just trying to get some insurance just in case they don't want to give him like all the bulk of the carries. And I don't know. I didn't look into it too much, but you never know. Campbell knows his MAC running backs too, so
that's true. I think it's more of a situation where we might go into the first 3 weeks of the year, like you said. I think Campbell does like to play around with his running backs. I mean, you look at Brees Hall his freshman year; he didn't start until halfway through the year. When David Montgomery was around, you still had. I mean, I'm thinking of guys like was Lang, Johnny Lang, and Sheldon Croney maybe have been around. He doesn't rely on just one guy. So if you think Abu is going to get 40 carries next year, you're lying to yourself, especially earlier in the year. So I think all of these guys are going to get a shot.
And I think even from a leadership perspective, sorry to interrupt you there. I mean, our running back room was so young last year, and just having an older guy to bring in that leadership, I mean, maybe he's just a really good dude, and that's something that could really help the whole running back room.
Absolutely. The last thing I got to ask, you bring in a guy like Jalen Travis. I would imagine he's starting next year. I'm not going to go watch spring practice, but there's enough where I've seen on film and just from his stats that he's bringing in from Princeton and everything of like that. You look at Tyler Miller, you look at James Neal, two starters that are coming back. The offensive tackle position is so valuable on every single team. Is this like you think maybe we're kicking these guys in the ass? Is it maybe we're going to rotate tackles? That's what I'm kind of curious. I have no idea. Like I said, I would love to be a fly on the wall in that offensive line room because Clinton's like, hey, we're bringing in guys. We might return all 5 starters from our offensive line last year, but it wasn't good enough. Clearly, they're going to get other bodies. Does that kind of seem like it to you where Maybe we're just
Yeah.
kicking some guys in the ass.
Yeah, I don't think they're trying to single out like any guys on the offensive line, but just as a unit, they need to bring more talent in. It was clear. It was obvious
Yep.
that they lack talent. And I mean, just bolstering just the group as a whole would be huge because it has not been a strong suit like at all in Campbell's era, really.
I think that's a good point too. I don't think maybe bringing all 5 stars back is a good thing next year. Maybe we're just rotating maybe 8 guys. I think there could be worse things than to have depth on the offensive line and being able to rotate multiple positions. Lastly, before we head out, the biggest news that really came out from recent, I know that me and Justin, we were talking today, kind of through some text chains and things like that. It's got a lot of people excited, at least for the diehards who are maybe thinking about an away game. The Big 12 came out and released its schedule. Tune into our Play the Fight Song podcast if you want to hear the full in-depth thoughts of what I think and what the other guys think on the actual Big 12 schedule in itself and around the conference. But today, obviously, we're going to just cover Iowa State's schedule going into next year. We talked about in one of the previous episodes where this team is at on over-under win totals, and we knew the opponents, but knowing when you're going to play them is huge. I think that's huge when you're basing a win total. So now we really have a really good idea. And I'll run through it here quick. It starts off with week 1. Cyclones are going to host North Dakota. That's an FCS team I don't think we've ever seen in our lifetime.
It's a good team.
At week 2, traveling to Iowa City, they got the Hawks. One of the weirdest things about the schedule, bye week right away after the Iowa game. I really hope we win that football game now, because if you sit there with a loss after the Iowa game and now you got to go 2 weeks without playing another football game, fans know that doesn't sit too well.
Yeah.
Arkansas State at home after the bye week. Conference play starts with a road trip to Houston. I think that's an interesting one to really start off conference play. Iowa State usually gets a home game, it feels like, when we start Big 12 play. Baylor after that at
game
home.
might be a little underlooked, but that is not going to be an easy game. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on who it was. Who did Houston just hire as their head coach?
Willie Fritz from Houston. From Tulane.
Really, really good hire.
Yep.
Where he's not going to want to come into conference play and lose that first game. And say Iowa State does win that Iowa game, we're going to be a pretty hyped team by that point, honestly. And I don't know, that game scares me.
Yeah, the bye weeks are interesting, and that could really factor on how this season turns around. We'll see if it plays out. After Houston, again, is Baylor at home, at West Virginia. I'm not sure. That's Iowa State's never had a ton of success going to Morgantown, and I think I would rather have it early this year. Maybe I'm thinking too far ahead or thinking too much into it. After that, they come back to Ames. They play UCF for the first time. That will be in Ames. I'm excited for that one. KJ Jefferson, the Arkansas transfer, will be taking his first trip to Ames.
Huge
then you
game
get
bye.
Yeah, absolutely. Then you get your bye week. You get your second bye week. For those who don't know, you are getting 2 bye weeks this season. Just more to add on what will be just a weird 2024 season. Coming out of the bye week, you get Texas Tech at home. At Kansas, Kansas announced they're going to be playing their football games in Arrowhead Stadium and Sporting KC. This football game against Iowa State will be played in Arrowhead, something Iowa State's a little familiar with. Cincinnati at home, at Utah, which I think, and everybody probably else can agree, that will be the toughest game on our schedule on November 23rd. And then you get Farmageddon. Maybe we get Snowmageddon for as late in the year as this game will be again on November 30th. Iowa State hosts Kansas State. Justin, what are your first initial thoughts when looking at that entire schedule?
I feel like the biggest thing is there's no MAC schools on this schedule. So that's pretty big,
big
for
one.
us.
That's a big one.
That's a big win. But on a more serious note, I mean, if you break it up into the first 6 games and the second 6 games, I know it's kind of hard to judge schedules based on how we think they're going to be, because we looked at Iowa State's schedule going into last year and we thought it was going to be way more tough than it was.
Yep.
So this is all kind of speculation, but I feel like the second half of the schedule definitely looks like it's going to be tougher. But I think that bye is in a good spot. We'll get 4 of those conference games under our belt, and then to get that bye going in those, like that November stretch, it's actually 5 games in November with how the schedule works out. But the fact that we've got 7 home games and then 1
Yep.
neutral field, we only have 4 true road games this year, and that's a big break for us, I feel like.
And I will say, obviously, Iowa it's a road game. I mean, it will be
Yeah, yeah.
95% of Hawkeye fans, but to play in state is another big thing. So you get 3 road games where you're traveling out of state. Is
Mhm.
basically how you want to think about it. One thing to note, teams that Iowa State will be missing this season, for good or for bad. Again, we will find out. Oklahoma State, they're bringing back Ollie Gordon. Colorado, little disappointed. Kind of want to see Colorado on the schedule.
We've got them next year.
Yep, Arizona, Arizona State, TCU, and I believe that's it. I don't think I might be missing one more, but that is who Iowa State will be missing this year.
BYU.
Yep, BYU, thanks. When I look at the schedule, number 1 is the bye weeks. Again, after that Iowa game is such a weird spot, and I don't know where else you put it. 2 bye weeks in a year is weird.
If we win the 2 games before the byes, they're in perfect spots, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree, because I think that second bye week comes at a great time. 5 November games, and to be playing meaningful November football, I think a bye week couldn't come at a better time right before you really get started on, depending on how the season goes. I think you made a great point. We thought the season or the schedule last year was going to be so tough. This year looks a lot easier and a lot more manageable, but who knows? We don't know in college football anymore how the season might shape out. This might end up being a super tough game. Like at West Virginia, that could very well be an undefeated West Virginia team they play. Like we thought they weren't going to be very good last year. They bring back a lot next year or going into next year. So that could be a super tough place to play. We don't know anything about, like you said, Justin, Willie Fritz and what Houston brings. Not going on the road for your first conference game is never an easy task. So that's kind of what I see. Looking at it again, I mean,
I think the over-under is going to be 8.5 now.
that's a good spot.
I'm going to be honest. I'm not trying to get my hopes up too high, but you can't look at the schedule and like not be excited.
Is it over 8.5 juiced, like over 8.5 plus 130?
Yeah, probably.
So under 8.5 minus 150 or something like that.
And I think that more or less comes down to how the Iowa game pans out with how poor that's gone the last how many years. If we win that game, I mean, I really think we could win 9 games for sure.
I would think so, but then again, I've been proven wrong that the Iowa game pretty much means nothing. You lose it last year and you turn around the season that you had, you win it the year before and wasn't absolute disaster. So as much as I would love to win the Iowa game, you take it for a grain of salt. I mean, the rivalry's fun, it's great, but at least in Campbell's tenure, that game hasn't really shown what the season is truly capable of. Yeah, I think 8.5 is a great spot. We talked about it today. At West Virginia, at Kansas and Kansas City, at Utah. Which of those 3 would you want to travel to?
Definitely going to that Kansas game. Not gonna miss that.
You're going to that one. No question. Yeah. You're going to that one.
It's very possible I go to 9 games this year, to be honest. Looking at the schedule. Between Utah and West Virginia, I mean, that Utah team, a lot of people are picking them to be in the top 10 this year preseason. Like that could shake up to be a really big game at the end of the season. If the season goes how we hope, like that could end up being a top 15 matchup.
I mentioned it on the podcast tonight. Doesn't it remind you of them kind of trying to set up the Iowa State Oklahoma game, Purdy senior year, where they were trying to set it up at the end of the year for a big noon kickoff? Hopefully those teams will be fighting for a spot into Dallas going in 2 weeks later. That's really what that spot on the schedule really reminded me of. Last thing before we go out, looking at the schedule again, is there a home? What's the most exciting home game? There's not one that I'm like, I think is just going to get everybody, like the casuals and everybody, really excited for. I don't think there's one that really takes your eye off when you first look at it.
The K-State game's always exciting with the Farmageddon rivalry, but honestly, for me, it's the UCF game.
Yes. Okay. I was gonna say the K-State game's great, but it could also be -5 degrees at kickoff. Like we have no idea. Is
Yeah.
also one thing I was factoring. I completely agree.
Yeah. Come in at October 19th, right before the bye. I mean, who knows how the beginning of the season's gonna pan out, but that game, if we can win that game, it just seems to be in a really good spot to be a great momentum game for us. And with the
Yep.
way UCF finished last year, I think they're actually a pretty legit team who's going to find themselves in the Big 12. And yeah, first time playing them. That's a pretty exciting game,
Yeah, I think that was the one I had on my mind too.
especially late October. You can't really beat late October, especially under the Campbell era where we've had a ton of success in October. That's going to be a fun one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. And Gus Malzahn coming in it's the first time, them obviously picking up KJ Jefferson, a familiar name in college football. That could be a big one.
Mhm.
Putting a bow on this. We'll talk about it more as we get closer to the season and throughout the offseason. Looking at this schedule and looking at the Big 12 schedules being released, there we are set up for another absolute chaotic Big 12 season. It
Absolutely.
is so in the air for everybody from top to bottom. And the schedule being released today, and I looked at it and I was like, holy hell, I do not know who's going to win this conference. It could literally be anybody, but it's going to be insane.
Like I said, Utah's gonna be right up there, like top 10 team with how they're talked about and how they're viewed, especially with Cam Rising coming back. But outside
Yep.
of that, like, yeah, I rattled off that I think we could be in the top 15 come that game. I said, all right, wins are gonna be 8.5. But honestly, you could say like 6 teams in the Big 12 will probably also say that about their team.
Yep.
UCF probably thinks
No,
that. Okie State
you could
probably thinks
say
that. Kansas
there.
probably thinks that. K-State probably thinks that. I
I
mean,
know I follow Big 12 fans on Twitter. There's like 8 or 10 teams. Like there are
yeah,
8 or 10 teams that maybe even all like there's like 12 or maybe all 16 think they got a shot, to be honest with you.
yeah.
All right.
It'll be
That
fun.
was fun. We'll kind of wrap that up. We are trying to get within our time crunch here on our off-season episodes. We try to keep these to 30 minutes. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We will be back once again once more Iowa State news pops up in the football world. As always, continue to follow us along at Play the Fight Song podcast. You can find us on Twitter, X now, TikTok, Instagram, and our episodes are released on Spotify and Apple. As always, you guys have a great rest of your week. Continue to follow Cyclone basketball as the season really kicks up here. And I hope we're all going to be 49ers fans here in a couple of weeks. Till then, we will talk to you guys soon. As always, you know what it is. We got to send it out. Go Cyclones.